Welcome back, SimCFI here, and let's get ready to start the airplane. So you got to pull out your checklist again, so that's Shift 2. Now with this checklist here, I was going through it, there's a handful of things missing. You can use it, it works. To get a little bit more realistic training, you either want to develop your own checklist, do a Google search online for a Cherokee 180 checklist. And so I'm using one from a Cherokee 140. It's got all the same procedural steps, and it's from a company called Checkmate. So it's a Checkmate checklist for the Cherokee 140. It's like $15 online. You can get checklists made on ForeFlight. There's a billion ways to get checklists. So however you do your checklist, make sure you have a list that tells you all the things to do. So I'm going to use the Checkmate one. So starting with interior, we got flaps up, which we did. Passenger load and briefing. So you do your passenger briefing. So at a minimum, you're briefing how to use the seat belts, the doors, the fire extinguisher, telling them to look out for other airplanes, call it out, try to be quiet when you're talking on the radio, what to do in an emergency, stuff like that. Okay, Hobbs tag time, record that if you're renting an airplane, fuel, proper tank. So let's see here. That right tank had a little bit less gas, it was right at the tabs. The left tank was a little bit up. So what I do is I put the fuel on the lower tank. So we come down to the fuel selector valve down here, and you move that around. This is off. Get left and right. So put it on left, which is the right was the lower tank. So put it on a lower tank. We'll taxi to the run-up area, then we'll put it to the highest tank. That way it verifies that both tanks feed to the engine properly. No restrictions. Alright. And then you want to make sure the circuit breakers are in. So this airplane has only a few circuit breakers. We have 2 here for the generator, and that is it. Everything else here are fuses. So you can remove those fuses and check them. Like if you have a landing light broken, just pull out the landing light fuse, and then you would check that. Alright, so now we want to make sure the alternate static is on the primary, it's closed. So some airplanes have alternate static, some don't. Cherokee 140, it's down here, right below the panel. Alright, so now we're going to test the brakes. Just give it a brake pedal test. So the silver part down here is the brakes. They're called toe brakes because you push them with your toes, the top part of your feet. And see, they work individually for each side, each wheel. So you just want to press them, feel some pressure. If you don't feel the pressure, then they're probably not going to work. So that's just a little quick test for that. Alright, so go into the starting checklist, seat track back locked, and make sure your seat belt's already on. And then Avionics off. This airplane has a Avionics master or a radio master. Some airplanes don't, and you have to individually, make sure all the avionics are turned off. So you go through all those avionics just like that. Alright, so we'll keep these on though. We'll use the Avionics master. So I'll turn all these back on. And just always leave the transponder on ALT, which is altitude reporting. It's kind of a new thing. It's in the Aeronautical Information Manual. For all airports, just leave it on ALT. So we make sure the avionics is off. And autopilot is off, which we do have. That's over here. Autopilot master is off. And then carburetor heat is off. So that's down here. It says carb heat pull hot. So that's on. And that's off. And then the mixture full rich. That's going to be the red lever. Push that all the way in. And then throttle slight. So especially with the push pull, you want to make sure it's pulled all the way out and then push it in a little bit. Okay, so we got throttle slight, and now we're prime the engine. So we come down here to the manual primer, you unscrew it, and then pull it out. And see that pin gets through that hole, that's what you unscrew. It's not like a threaded screw. You're just turning that pin to get out. So we'll prime this about 2 or 3 times depending on the temperature. Usually I do about 4 primes in the winter when it's really cold and 2 primes in the summer when it's really hot. Then you find the in-between. Alright, so we got it primed. Make sure the brakes are set. We can do that just by holding the toe brakes, or we can set the parking brake. So to set the parking brake, you pull on the handle, and then you push that button down like that. And let's open this window here. Make sure the propeller area is clear. So you check around and you shout out the window, "Clear prep." And close that back up. And now we turn on the master switch and the beacon. So we got master on, the beacon is already on. And we'll turn on the fuel pump. And you can hear the noise. And you can see the fuel pressure rise. You want to check that right before you start to make sure it's working. And now we bring the mags over to start. So on this airplane it's got the magnetos, which is where the key is, separate from the starter. So you put the key in, turn it to both, and then we hit the starter. There we go. Got our hand on our throttle. Get the throttle set to around 1000 RPM. And you want to check the oil pressure to make sure it's rising up nicely, which it did, right up to 60 pounds. Okay, so that's good. And now we'll turn the fuel pump off, and we'll check the fuel pressure to make sure it's holding. And then we'll lean the mixture. And the best way to lean it the first time is you just lean it until the engine runs a little bit rough, and then push it back in a little bit. Right there. Just push it back in. So it's about halfway out on my Saitek throttle quadrant. Then we want to make sure we check the suction and the amps. So the amps here, if this needle was at 0, it would indicate the alternator is not working. Anywhere in this range between 0 and like 2 and 20 is your normal for amps. And the oil temperature will take some time to climb up. Okay, we'll put the headset in to those jacks. The bigger jack is for the headset or the headphone, and the small jack is for the mic. Alright, so now that it's started, we go down a pre-taxi and taxi checklist. We have seatbelt harness, heat vent defrost. So the heat and defrost is over here. And we also have cabin air. So these are these three down here. Just pull those out as necessary. And then there's also vents down by the floor. So you pull the little metal tab towards you to open that vent, and you can direct it around. Alright, avionics on and set, so you turn all of your avionics on individually, or just with your radio master, and then make sure you set your radios. So with this audio select panel up here, everything you select up here is what you're going to listen to. The top row is all for the speaker, the bottom row is for the headphone. And so right now we have 123.0, this is the common traffic advisory frequency at Lincoln, and 2425 for the automated weather observation. Right now the microphone selector is selected at COM1, so if you transmit, it'll transmit at COM1, and it shows that T when you're transmitting, just like that when you push the talk switch on the yoke. And this auto switch here says you're automatically listening to whatever frequency, whatever radio that you're transmitting. So you can listen to COM2 additionally by pressing this button, and it gets your weather. Or if a lot of people are talking on CTAF, you can just flick this over to COM2, and then it's going there. So we'll listen to the automated weather. So altimeter 29908. So we come over here to the altimeter, and we see 29.9. So 2998 is going to be this this last tick mark. Every tick mark is 0.02. So just like that. Winds 336 at 10. So that's over here. Winds 336 at 10. Visibility greater than 20. Sky condition, no clouds below 12,000. Gives you the temperature dew point in the altimeter again. So we'll turn that off. And the wind's 336. Or 360, I think it was. Let's check it again. 336. Normally it doesn't give you to that degree. So 336. What you can do is set your, in this little gauge up here, this is for your VOR typically, but little trick for the winds. 336, set that up here. And so then whatever runway number falls in the upper half is the runway that's going to be favored. So at Lincoln, there's runway 33 and 15. So we're going to take runway 33. Okay, so now Avionics on and set. We listen to the AWAS, got the altimeter set, transponder, alt and squawk, so that's down here, altitude, and 1200 is your standard squawk code. You can turn these dials to change the squawk code. You'll get that when you start getting with ATC, air traffic control, for flight following. So for now, just alt, ALT, and 1200. Okay, and then we'll check the brakes, and we'll check all of our turning instruments. So you want to make sure the area is clear for taxiing, which it is. We'll remove the parking brake, and then we'll give the airplane just a little bit of power, let it roll forward like that, then bring the power back down, test the brakes. Brakes work. And now we'll check the rest of our instruments as we taxi. So now here we can make a radio call. Right now we're at transient parking, and for non-towered airports, you communicate on the common traffic advisory frequency, and the radio call goes something like this. Lincoln traffic, Cherokee 099er Whiskey, transient, taxi 33 Lincoln. Alright, so now everybody in the area knows that we're at the transient parking ramp, and we're taxiing to runway 33. And so when we make a left turn, the turn coordinator goes down, and we get smaller headings on the heading indicator and the compass, and when you turn right, the opposite is true. And in turning the airplane, by the way, you move the rudder pedals left and right by your feet. So when you want to make a left-hand turn, you push on the black part, left foot forward, right foot forward, and see with the Piper it's very direct. We don't have to tap the brake or anything to help turn. So, very direct steering. It's a direct connection with the Pipers. And now we just taxi to the runway. And you want to keep this yellow line roughly going through your right leg in the real plane, or right around the attitude indicator here. And that keeps you on the center line. You may have the tendency to put it right below you, but you have to remember that we're sitting on either side of the airplane. So that still kind of puts the taxiway. You're a little bit to the right of it, so. Okay, so now we're going off to the left, to the right here. Get that line through my right leg, and we're taxiing to runway 33. So the taxi speed is supposed to be no faster than a brisk walk. Usually we go a little bit faster than that, but you don't want to go too fast, because then the FAA can get you for careless or reckless operation. And especially when you're taxiing around hangars and around the ramp, you really do want to taxi kind of slow, because then you don't know who's going to pop around the side of the hangar with an airplane, or a car, or some kid running around. You just don't know. And see, I'm not even using brakes to slow down. If you taxi at the right speed and your engine idles low enough, you can just reduce the power to slow down without using brakes. Works pretty well. Always clearing the area when you're going through the intersections like this. Gotta make sure you know who's coming down where. And a quick lesson on runway signs and airport markings. So when you have these signs, these are telling you the taxiways. So right now it says you're on taxiway Delta because of the black background, and the yellow background with this arrow indicates that Alpha goes off to the left. And now coming on to the front, you again see that we're on taxiway Delta, and we are about to enter runway 33 when we get up to here. So once you get up to the end of the runway, most airports have this extra pavement section over here for the run-up. This is where we perform all of our pre-takeoff checklist items and check the engine for normal operation. So we're going to peel off and go over there now. And this is where we perform the run-up checklist. So usually I just pull in here and angle it a little bit left, come to the far side of the pavement so a bunch of other aircraft can stack up behind us if necessary. If there's a bunch of planes, you want to have room for them. It's a little awkward having them taxi in front of you to park on your left side. Alright, so now we can hold the brakes with our toes or set the parking brake. And now we go to the run-up checklist. So run-up, brake set, fuel proper tank. So this is where we switch to the fullest tank, which is the left tank. Make sure the trim is set for takeoff. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. You have to look up at the ceiling. We got this this little crank up top. So moving it counterclockwise is nose down trim. Moving it clockwise is nose up trim. You can also think about it as winding it up and unwinding it to go down. Whatever way makes it work. It also has a little sticker that says down is this way, up is that way. You just want it in the neutral position for takeoff. Alright. Flight controls, free and correct. You want to make sure your flight controls they have the full range of motion and they move in the proper directions. So a good trick for this is box the controls. You make a box motion, so you put it all the way forward and left, and you see the left aileron is up, the right aileron is down, and if you look over your left shoulder, you see the stabilator is down. Then you pull the yoke back while still holding left, stabilator is up, you can rotate to the right, and you see that aileron went down, and now the right aileron is up, and then you push the stick forward and the stabilator goes back down, and then you can neutralize it and pull it back. So that tests its full range of motion, and you're checking the controls to make sure they go in the proper directions. Alright, so that's flight controls, free and correct. Now annunciator lights, we don't have any annunciator lights in this airplane. The 172R has them. A little test switch that has warning lights basically to tell you running low on fuel, vacuum pump failure, stuff like that. Alright, so then instruments, it's talking about flight instruments. You want to check your flight instruments, make sure they're indicating properly. So in the sim, the airspeed indicator is a little bit more sensitive. It's detecting some of the headwind component we have. In the real plane, you see this too if the winds are strong enough. But you want to make sure it's right around 0, because that's obviously what we're doing, 0 airspeed. And this is in miles per hour primarily, miles per hour. And then knots is on the inside, so all of our speeds will be miles per hour. We have the attitude indicator. You want to make sure blue is up, brown is down. This is placing us artificially against the horizon. And you want to make sure this little orange airplane is set right on the yellow bar, just like that. Then we make sure the altimeter is set. It is 2998, and it's reading the field elevation of 121 feet, approximately. Vertical speed is showing 0, because we're not going up or down. You want to make sure the heading indicator is set to the compass. The compass is showing about 295, 294. So we'll set that down here. So you have to push in this knob and then you turn it. So 29 is right there. So like 294. Come on. There we go, right about there. And then if you have a heading bug, you can set that as well. So it's usually good to set this to the runway that you're taking. So we're taking runway 33, so we'll set that right there. And in the turn coordinator, we checked that during the taxi to make sure it went left and right with the turns. Okay, so the flight instruments are correct. And now we'll put the mixture to best power. So at sea level, that's going to be full rich. Up at higher elevations, like 5,000 feet, you'll be leaned out for the run-up and takeoff. So mixture best power all the way forward for sea level. Primer in and locks. You just make sure the primer is locked in. Give it a little tug. Okay, now we're going to do the run-up. We're going to take it up to 2,000 RPM over here. We'll check all of the engine gauges, and then we'll check the magnetos and the carburetor heat. Alright, so up to 2,000 we go. Alright, we check all the gauges. Fuel quantity, amps about 10, that's normal. Oil pressure, fuel pressure, oil temperature, all in the green. And the suction is between 4 and 5. It's about normal. We'll check the magnetos now. So what we do, we're going to be watching the tachometer and also listening. And when we turn the key left 2 clicks, we hear an RPM drop, we see an RPM drop, it's about 100 RPM, that's a normal drop. 2 clicks back to the right to both, goes back to where we had it, and then 1 click left, and it goes down, 1 click right, We're back on both. It's back up to 2000. And then we check the carburetor heat. There's a little RPM drop. Turn it back off. And then there we go. Now we're just going to bring the throttle down to idle all the way. You want to make sure the engine holds in idle. It does. We'll bring it back up to 1000. And that completes the run-up checklist. Now we're going to do the pre-takeoff checklist. Flaps 0 to 25 degrees, so we don't need any. 2 notches is 25, but we don't need any flaps for our normal takeoff. Mixture best power, that's all the way in again. Fuel pump on, and we'll turn the landing light on as well. Carburetor heat is off, and then pitot heat as required, that's down here if we need it. Heading indicator to compass, we did that. Transponder, doors, windows, locked and secure. Strobe lights. If your airplane has strobe lights, you turn those on for takeoff normally, and then turn them off after you land. And then note the time, make sure the parking brake gets released, holding the brakes now. And you want to make sure you establish your abort plan or your takeoff briefing. So normally to make it easy, at these larger airports with a 6,000 foot runway here at Lincoln, I just say if we're not off the ground by halfway down the runway, we're going to abort the takeoff, because that means the engine is probably not performing properly. If we have an engine failure below 1,000 feet, we're going to be landing in the field or wherever the best place to land is. Above 1,000 feet, we'll turn around and come back to the runway. And so that's the takeoff briefing. Alright, so the next video we're going to cover a normal takeoff, climb, and leveling off in cruise and doing some trim. Alright, see you then.